hands cuffed behind his back, blood dripping from a split lip. He stared at the officer pressing a knee into his neck. His only crime? Sitting in his own car, outside his own house. Neighbors watched, some filming, some just turning away. They thought they were breaking another nameless man. But they didn't know they had just humiliated a federal investigator, and he was about to dismantle their department from the inside out. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching us from. It was supposed to be a quiet Sunday night. Micah Brooks leaned back in his car seat, engine off, music low, scrolling through his phone after a long drive back from visiting family. Outside his townhouse in suburban Northlake, Georgia, the street was quiet, barely lit by dim yellow lamps. Until the flashing blue and red lights filled his rearview mirror. Micah's stomach dropped instantly. 2 patrol cars. No sirens. No announcement. He sat up straight, putting both hands visibly on the steering wheel. His heart hammered, but his movement stayed slow, deliberate. A shadow approached his window. "Step out of the car," the officer barked without introduction. Micah cracked the window, calm but firm. "Officer, can you tell me why I'm being stopped?" The second officer moved in fast, hand already on his weapon. "I said, step out," he shouted. Micah obeyed, stepping carefully into the humid night air, hands raised slightly. The taller officer, name tag reading D. Weller, grabbed Micah roughly by the arm. "You match a description," Weller sneered. Micah's voice was even. "I live here. That's my house." The other officer, shorter but stocky, pushed Micah's shoulder hard, spinning him around. "Yeah? Got ID to prove it." "It's in my back pocket," Micah said. Weller didn't wait. He jammed Micah against the side of the car with unnecessary force. The metal dug into Micah's ribs. The world spun for a second as the cuffs clicked too tight around his wrists. "You think you're special?" The short one sneered as he kicked Micah's legs wider apart. Micah gritted his teeth as his lips split against the cold steel hood. "I haven't done anything," he said, tasting blood. "Sure you haven't," Weller muttered. Neighbors peeked through curtains. A few stood outside, watching. Some held up phones but stayed silent. Micah caught eyes with a middle-aged woman across the street. She shook her head slightly and went back inside. No one was coming. No one ever did. The officers searched his car without consent, tossing papers, empty coffee cups, a briefcase onto the pavement. Inside the briefcase, they didn't notice a Department of Justice internal investigator's badge tucked behind a stack of documents. They didn't care who he was. They only saw what they wanted to see. "Put him in the car," Weller barked. Micah was shoved into the back seat, door slamming behind him. Pinned against the unyielding plastic, wrist raw, head pounding, he made a silent vow. This wouldn't end in humiliation. This wouldn't end in silence. They had just arrested the wrong man. And by the time he was finished, every officer involved would wish they had never touched him. The ride to the precinct was short but deliberate. Every stop sign was hit hard, every turn sharp enough to slam Micah against the door. Neither officer spoke. They didn't have to. The message was clear: stay quiet, accept your place, disappear into the system. But Micah wasn't built for that. Inside the precinct, they dragged him through processing like an object. No explanations, no rights read, no call aloud. His ID, real ID, showing his Northlake address, was stuffed into a plastic evidence bag without a glance. Micah sat in a holding cell, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, blood drying on his lip, wrist swelling inside the cuffs. He could hear Weller laughing somewhere down the hallway. "Another one off the streets," someone said. Micah closed his eyes and inhaled slowly, gathering every ounce of control. They didn't realize who they were dealing with. Not yet. The first mistake they made was thinking he was powerless. The second would be realizing too late that he wasn't alone. At 2:14 a.m., they finally uncuffed him without a word and shoved his property back into his arms. Released on recognizance, the desk sergeant grunted, avoiding eye contact. Micah stared at him evenly. "Where's my vehicle?" he asked. The sergeant shrugged. "Probably impounded. File a complaint if you want." The door buzzed and clicked open. Micah stepped into the humid night air, the city around him pulsing with distant sirens and the soft hum of streetlights. He stood there for a long moment, letting the coolness of the air calm the fire building inside him. Then he pulled out his second phone, a secured line, reserved for only a handful of contacts. He tapped a number. It rang twice. A voice answered immediately. "Micah." "It happened," he said. Silence. Then, "Send me everything." Micah sent the voice memos he had managed to record inside the cruiser, the time-stamped photos he'd taken of his injuries the moment they uncuffed him, the note he scribbled about badge numbers before they shoved him into the cell. Evidence. Unfiltered. Irrefutable. The voice on the line spoke again. "You want this quiet?" it asked. Micah stared out across the dark streets of Northlake. "No," he said. "I want it public." He ended the call and started walking. Not home. To the federal building downtown. To file a formal civil rights violation report, one that would trigger an automatic DOJ review of every single arrest, every complaint, every case tied to Northlake PD over the past 5 years. He knew the process. He had written it. They would scramble to cover it up. They would panic when they realized who he was. But it was too late. They hadn't just assaulted an innocent man. They had assaulted a federal investigator trained to tear systems apart from the inside. And now Micah Brooks was going to make sure Northlake's corruption wasn't just exposed. It was obliterated. By sunrise, Micah's formal complaint was logged into the federal system. Automatic notifications triggered across agencies. Internal Affairs. The Civil Rights Division. The United States Attorney's Office. Northlake PD didn't know it yet, but their time bomb had started ticking. Micah sat alone in a sterile office, his split lip swollen, wrist bruised. A junior DOJ agent entered with a laptop, placing it carefully on the table. "We're uploading your body file now," she said. Micah nodded. Every picture, every audio clip, every medical record he had documented during the long, brutal night. The agent hesitated at the door. "For what it's worth," she said quietly, "they picked the wrong man." Micah didn't smile. "They always think that," he said. By mid-morning, the mayor of Northlake, desperate to contain the spiraling media storm, called an emergency press conference. Standing stiffly behind a podium, the mayor read from a prepared statement. "The city of Northlake is committed to a full and fair investigation of the incident involving Mr. Micah Brooks." Empty words. Micah watched the broadcast from the DOJ's media room, arms crossed. He wasn't interested in apologies crafted by lawyers. He wanted facts. He wanted accountability. He wanted the public to see what really happened. And he had the evidence to force it. Veronica Evans, one of the top civil rights attorneys in the state, called within the hour. "I saw the footage," she said, her voice sharp. "I'm filing your federal civil rights lawsuit today." Micah agreed without hesitation. This wasn't just about him. It was about every black man who had sat silently in a cell after being treated like a criminal for existing. It was about every family who had buried their anger under layers of fear. And it was about making sure Northlake PD paid, in court, in public, in ways they couldn't erase with another press release. Veronica moved fast. Within 2 days, the complaint was filed in federal court. Brooks versus City of Northlake, et al. Multiple claims. Fourth Amendment violations. 14th Amendment violations. Conspiracy to violate civil rights under color of law. The media latched onto it immediately. Clips of Micah's bloody face and swollen wrist ran on every major network. Old cases resurfaced, other arrests by Officer Weller that ended in suspicious injuries. Other names. Other silenced voices. Micah sat in his apartment, laptop glowing in the darkness, as emails poured in. "I saw what they did to you. They did the same to my brother. Thank you for fighting back. How can we help?" He answered every message. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about building something they couldn't tear down. Micah knew the city would fight. He knew they would smear him, threaten him, try to bury him under bureaucracy. But he was ready. He had been preparing for this battle long before the cuffs cut into his skin. And this time, they wouldn't be fighting a man alone. They would be fighting every truth they had buried for years, and the man who refused to let them stay buried. Northlake's defense came fast, and it came dirty. Anonymous sources flooded the media with leaks. Claims that Micah had been uncooperative, aggressive, even threatening. None of it true. They painted him as dangerous because they had nothing else. Micah expected it. It was the same playbook used for generations. Attack the victim. Smear the story. Confuse the public until truth and lie blurred together. But this time, he had receipts. Veronica released the full unedited footage from a neighbor's security camera. Micah sitting calmly in his car. No aggressive moves. No threats. Officers escalating without cause. The footage exploded online. Within 24 hours, the city's narrative collapsed. Micah didn't gloat. He tightened his focus. The next step wasn't winning in the media. It was winning in court. Veronica scheduled depositions for every officer involved, starting with Officer Weller himself. In a gray conference room downtown, under bright, unforgiving lights, Weller sat hunched at a long table. Micah watched silently from across the room, his presence a blade of quiet pressure. Veronica's questioning was clinical, sharp. "Officer Weller, can you explain why you approached my client with your weapon drawn, despite no report of violence?" Weller shifted, sweat beading at his temples. "It's standard procedure," he mumbled. "Standard procedure to threaten an unarmed man sitting in his own driveway?" Objection from his lawyer. Overruled by the court reporter. Weller stumbled through answer after answer, each lie exposed by time-stamped footage and public records. Micah didn't have to say a word. The truth crushed them without mercy. Other officers fared no better. Body cam inconsistencies. False incident reports. Training records that showed clear violations of department policy. Piece by piece, Veronica dismantled their defense until only rot remained. Meanwhile, community support for Micah exploded. Donations poured into his legal fund. Marches filled the streets of Northlake, peaceful but unignorable. Signs reading, "Justice for Micah. End racial profiling. Our streets, our rights." The city council held emergency meetings behind closed doors, desperate to contain the fire. But it was too late. Micah had shifted the center of gravity. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He had become the rallying point for a city's buried anger and its demand for something better. One night, as he left a community meeting, an elderly man stopped him on the sidewalk. "Don't let them wear you down," the man said, voice rough with emotion. "We need you standing." Micah gripped his hand firmly. "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, because he understood now. This wasn't just about clearing his own name. It was about making sure no one else had to live through what he did and be told it was normal. Northlake wanted him to fade away. Instead, he was becoming the storm that would wash them clean, and he was just getting started. The subpoenas hit Northlake PD like a battering ram. Micah and Veronica didn't just request documents. They demanded full access. Internal affairs reports, disciplinary records, officer complaint histories, and the court backed them. The city fought, tried redactions, delays, legal roadblocks, but every motion they filed was shredded by the weight of evidence already stacked against them. Micah sat at a long conference table, combing through thousands of pages. It was worse than anyone imagined. Officers with dozens of use-of-force complaints still on patrol. Supervisors who buried evidence of misconduct. A decades-long pattern of targeting black residents under the guise of neighborhood safety initiatives. They had turned systemic racism into official policy. And now, every dirty secret was documented, time-stamped, undeniable. Micah read the reports until his vision blurred, his jaw clenched tight. But he didn't stop. Because he wasn't just building a case for court. He was building a case for history. A case that couldn't be denied or buried when the news cycle moved on. Veronica entered the room late one evening, dropping a fresh stack of files onto the table. "New whistleblower," she said. Micah looked up sharply. "Who?" "A clerk from the records department. She says they were ordered to destroy certain complaint files last year, especially those involving Officer Weller." Micah's blood went cold. "Do we have her statement?" Veronica nodded grimly. "Sworn affidavit. She's willing to testify." Micah leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling for a long moment. The system wasn't just broken. It was weaponized. And now, for the first time, they had proof from inside. The next morning, Micah and Veronica filed an amended complaint, expanding the charges. Evidence tampering. Obstruction of justice. Civil conspiracy. The city's defense lawyers scrambled. Meetings were canceled. Depositions rescheduled. Because now, it wasn't just about bad cops. It was about an entire administration collapsing under its own corruption. Micah knew the pressure would intensify. Anonymous threats flooded the Foundation's email inbox. Trolls flooded social media with lies. Old colleagues warned him to watch his back. He listened. But he didn't back down. Because the truth was finally shifting the ground beneath Northlake's feet. At a town hall meeting, packed wall to wall, Micah spoke directly to the people. "They think if they drag this out long enough, we'll forget," he said, voice steady. "They think if they scare us enough, we'll stay quiet." He paused, letting the weight of the room settle. "But they forget, we're not asking for justice anymore." He leaned forward into the microphone. "We're demanding it." The room erupted. Applause. Shouts. Hope. Real, tangible hope forged from blood, from scars, from stubbornness. Micah stepped back, heart pounding not from fear, but from purpose. He wasn't just fighting a case. He was building a reckoning. And there was no stopping it now. The settlement offer came on a Thursday afternoon. A thick manila envelope, slid across the table by the city's lead attorney, hands trembling just enough for Micah to notice. 7 figures. No admission of guilt. No public acknowledgement. Veronica didn't even glance at Micah before pushing the envelope back across the table. Not interested, she said coldly. The attorney's face flushed red. You'll never get more than this at trial, he snapped. Micah leaned forward slowly, voice low enough to make the entire room go silent. I'm not here for the money, he said. I'm here for the truth. He stood and walked out without another word. Because he understood what they were trying to buy, silence. And Micah Brooks wasn't for sale. The trial date was set. March 14th. A date that would mark the beginning of Northlake's public reckoning. In the weeks leading up, Micah worked tirelessly. Depositions. Strategy meetings. Witness preparation. No shortcuts. No distractions. He met with victims who had never been believed before, men and women who showed up to community forums, nervously clutching faded paperwork, court documents, medical records. One woman, Rosa Daniels, stood trembling before handing him a battered file. My son, she whispered. They ruined him. Micah took her file carefully, like something sacred. He reviewed every case, every forgotten voice, and built them into the foundation of something unstoppable. It wasn't just his fight anymore. It was everyone's. The night before trial, he sat alone in the foundation's office. The city skyline glowed outside the window, silent and cold. He thought about everything they had tried to do to him. The violence, the humiliation, the threats, the lies. And he smiled. Not because it didn't hurt, but because he was still standing, still fighting, still forcing the system to face what it had spent decades denying. The door creaked open, and Veronica poked her head in. You ready? She asked. Micah nodded. As ready as they aren't. She smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since the beginning. They're terrified of you, she said. Micah stood, gathering the files into his bag. Good, he said quietly. They should be. Because tomorrow wasn't just about winning damages. It was about making sure Northlake's name was forever tied to the truth it tried to bury. It was about leaving a mark so deep, no apology, no payout, no public relations campaign could ever erase it. And it was about showing every single person watching, every citizen beaten down by injustice, that you could fight back. And win. Micah switched off the lights and stepped into the cold night. Tomorrow, the courthouse would be packed. Reporters. Families. Old victims carrying new hope. And Micah Brooks would be walking through those doors not as a victim, but as a weapon. The courthouse steps buzzed with tension. News vans lined the street. Police officers clustered in tight knots near the entrances. Protesters waved signs demanding justice, their chants echoing off the stone walls. Micah moved through it all like a blade through fog, focused, unstoppable. Inside the courtroom, the air crackled with pressure. On one side, Micah and Veronica, armed with mountains of evidence. On the other, Northlake's attorneys, pale and tight-lipped, huddled behind stacks of hastily prepared defenses. The judge, an old veteran of civil rights cases, entered and called the court to order. Opening arguments began. Veronica's voice rang out first, calm, devastating. Micah Brooks, she said, gesturing to him without fanfare, was brutalized, humiliated, and stripped of his dignity for doing nothing more than sitting in his own car. She paused, letting the truth settle. And he wasn't the first. But we intend to make sure he is the last. The defense attorney sputtered through his statement, trying to paint Micah as combative, evasive, uncooperative. But the footage, the records, the depositions, they all told a different story. Micah sat still, hands folded, face unreadable. He didn't need theatrics. He had truth. Witnesses took the stand. Rosa Daniels, trembling but determined, described how her son was beaten during a routine stop. Officer Nunez testified about the unwritten orders to clear certain neighborhoods after dark. Even former dispatchers came forward, admitting how calls were coded based on the race of the caller. Every story layered over the next, a suffocating mountain of evidence. Northlake's defenses crumbled hour by hour. At one point, the city's attorney tried a desperate move, introducing grainy security footage of a totally different incident to confuse the jury. Veronica shredded it in minutes. Wrong date, she snapped. Wrong street. Wrong man. Micah watched the jury closely. He saw the anger building behind their controlled expressions. The disgust. The slow realization that this wasn't just one mistake. It was a system, designed, protected, nurtured. And it was finally being exposed under oath. Midway through the trial, a leak hit the press. Internal email showing senior city officials joking about managing public outrage and waiting until it blows over. The jury wasn't sequestered. They saw the headlines. They read the quotes. By the third day, it was clear. This wasn't just Micah's case anymore. It was a trial of the city itself. And Northlake was losing. Badly. Micah never once looked at Weller during the trial. Not out of fear. Out of certainty. Because he knew something Weller didn't. This wasn't about vengeance. It was about dismantling a system that believed it could survive behind lies forever. And when the final gavel fell, it would shake every brick of that broken foundation loose. Closing arguments arrived like the final drumbeat of a long, brutal march. Veronica stood tall before the jury, voice clear, unflinching. "You have seen the truth," she said. "You have heard it in the voices of victims. You have read it in the city's own words." She paced slowly, each step deliberate. This is not an isolated incident. This is a pattern, a culture, a deliberate choice to treat certain people as disposable. She stopped, turning to face them fully. "You have the power to say, no more. No theatrics. No shouting. Just the quiet, unshakable weight of reality." When the defense rose, it was a pitiful sight. Weak denials. Vague excuses. Empty appeals for understanding. Micah barely listened. He didn't need to. The jury's faces told the story. Anger, sorrow, disgust. They weren't just listening. They were remembering. The judge gave final instructions. The jury filed out. And then the long, aching wait began. Micah sat quietly in the courthouse lobby, Veronica beside him, her hand steady on a closed folder. The protesters outside hadn't left. They stood firm, chanting low and rhythmic. Hours passed, every minute heavy. Then, just after sunset, the courtroom buzzer sounded. Verdict reached. Micah rose slowly, heart hammering. This was it. The courtroom filled again, every seat taken. The foreman, a middle-aged black woman with fire in her eyes, stood with the verdict form in hand. The judge asked, "Has the jury reached a unanimous verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," she said firmly. She handed the form to the bailiff. The judge read silently, then nodded. "In the case of Brooks versus City of Northlake, we the jury find in favor of the plaintiff, Micah Brooks." The courtroom trembled with the sound of restrained emotion, gasps, muffled cries, fists tightening in silent victory. But it wasn't over yet. The judge continued. "For violations of constitutional rights, the jury awards compensatory damages in the amount of $8 million. A pause. And punitive damages in the amount of $20 million. $20 million. A number so large it shattered the city's facade of invincibility. The courtroom erupted, not in cheers, but in stunned, overwhelming release. Tears. Hugs. Whispers of finally. Micah sat frozen for a moment, absorbing it all. He had won. But more importantly, they had lost. Not just the officers. Not just the city. The system that thought it could destroy people like him without consequence had been dragged into the light and broken. Forever. The judge banged the gavel, finalizing the judgment. Court adjourned. Outside, the night air was electric. Micah stepped into a sea of flashing cameras and shouting reporters. He raised one hand, not in victory, but in warning. This wasn't the end. It was a beginning. And Northlake, and every city like it, had been put on notice. The silence was broken. The reckoning had arrived. And Micah Brooks was leading it. The fallout hit harder than anyone expected. Within a week, the police chief resigned under pressure. 2 senior officers were indicted on federal obstruction charges. The mayor announced he would not seek re-election. But Micah wasn't celebrating. He was working. The Hayesbrooks Foundation, born out of his settlement, opened its first office downtown, a fortress for civil rights advocacy, legal aid, and community training. Micah wasn't content with just tearing down the old walls. He was building something better in their place. Citywide reforms rolled in fast. Mandatory body cam audits. Independent civilian review boards. Monthly public forums with department leadership. No more hiding behind closed doors. Micah attended every meeting, sitting quietly in the back. Watching. Listening. Reminding them with his presence alone that the people of Northlake were no longer blind, no longer silent, and no longer afraid. Still, the threats never stopped. Anonymous emails. Late-night calls. Vandalism at the Foundation's office. Micah documented it all. Exposed it publicly. Turned every threat into fuel for more action, more change. They had tried to scare him back into silence. Instead, they had taught him how to fight even harder. One afternoon, while leaving a youth rights workshop, Micah spotted a familiar figure leaning against a lamppost. Officer Weller. No badge. No uniform. Just a man, broken, watching the world move past him. Their eyes locked across the street. For a moment, neither moved. Weller looked away first, shoving his hands deep into his pockets, vanishing into the crowd. Micah turned back to the students pouring out of the community center, young, laughing, unafraid. He smiled quietly to himself. The old power was dying, and he was helping to bury it. Later that night, as he reviewed new case files at his desk, Veronica knocked softly on his door. "You need to see this," she said. It was a letter formal, stamped with the Department of Justice seal. The DOJ was launching a full-scale civil rights investigation into not just Northlake, but multiple neighboring cities. Inspired by the Brooks case, empowered by what he had proven could be done, Micah sat back, the letter heavy in his hands. It had started with a single night of violence. A single wrong move by officers who thought no one would ever fight back. And now, the ripples were spreading across counties, across the state. He thought of the nights he sat bleeding, humiliated, alone. He thought of the people who had said, "Don't make trouble." He thought of the kids who would grow up in a world where silence was no longer the price of survival. This was more than a victory. It was a legacy. And Micah Brooks wasn't finished writing it yet. Tomorrow, new battles would rise. New cities would need help. New walls would need to be torn down. And he would be ready. Always ready. 6 months later, the city of Northlake looked nothing like the place Micah had first encountered. New leadership filled the council chambers, younger, more diverse, fiercely committed to transparency. Community liaisons walked beats with officers now. Complaint data was public and easy to access. Body cams didn't malfunction anymore, and if they did, it was an automatic suspension. The fear that had once coated the streets like a second skin was lifting. And everywhere Micah went, he felt it. Hope cautious, bruised, but real. The Hayes-Brooks Foundation had expanded into 3 neighboring cities, training young attorneys, holding Know Your Rights seminars, and organizing grassroots legal defense teams. But for Micah, it was never about growth. It was about memory, making sure no one forgot how easily injustice could creep back in if left unchecked. One gray afternoon, Micah found himself back in front of his old townhouse. The driveway where it had all started, where humiliation had nearly broken him. The new owners were out front, a young couple painting the porch railings, music drifting softly from a speaker. Normal life. Uninterrupted. Exactly how it should have been that night, and every night. Micah stood quietly for a moment, then turned away. He didn't need to stay. He didn't need to explain. Because he hadn't just survived what they did to him. He had rewritten the ending. Later that evening, at a packed civic center meeting, Micah stepped onto a small stage with no fanfare. No teleprompters. No security details. Just a simple microphone and a crowd that listened not out of obligation, but out of belief. He spoke plainly. "This fight isn't over," he said. "It never will be." He scanned the room, faces of all colors, all ages, all carrying the weight of battles past and battles yet to come. But what happened here, what we did together, proves that when you refuse to be silent, when you refuse to be erased, you can force the world to see you. He paused. And once they see you, they can't unsee you. Micah left the stage without applause by his request, because this wasn't about him. It was about the movement that would continue long after he was gone. Outside, under the cool evening sky, he stood alone for a moment, letting the hum of the city wash over him. Tomorrow would bring new fights, new systems to challenge, new doors to kick down. Micah Brooks smiled to himself, small, steady, unbreakable. Because now, when injustice knocked, it wouldn't find silence behind the door. It would find him, standing tall, fists unclenched, voice unwavering, ready, always ready. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories that inspire action and hope.